Welcome back to the D-League episode 7 today. We're going to talk about hardware. It's me, Jan, again with Bilal. Say hi, Bilal.
Hi.
All right, so today it's just hardware. We're just going to talk about one topic today. So let's get it going. So let's talk about what platforms actually have hardware requirements. And for starters, it's pretty much just PC and smartphones and tablets that have varying hardware. Well, you could say the PlayStation 4 and PS4 Pro also have different hardware, but it's not that different as on the other platforms. So, what do you think, Bilal? Do you agree?
Yeah, actually, before we started recording this, I didn't realize I was thinking that it was pretty much only like in terms of consoles that like 2DS and 3DS have different hardware. But now that I think about it, I forgot. But I think at E3 they announced the new Xbox. Like they have One S and One X. I can't remember. I'm guessing the X was the better one. So, and that was like intended to have, I don't even remember. Basically, it had better hardware, and they intended to have like higher performance versions of games in the future on them. So I guess now consoles are moving to that space, but for the most part, consoles have kind of just been one piece of hardware, and then PCs are the one where it's like, we got to worry about system requirements and all that. But I guess now we have the option of making different detail or like quality levels for consoles too. So I mean that's something new that we'll see, I guess. But
yeah, I guess that's something for pretty much the future. Like right now, you have computers, like PCs, you can customize where you have a big selection of components you can actually use. Like processors, graphic cards, even like using an hard disk drive or a solid state disk, stuff like that. And then on smartphones or tablets, the longer this smartphone or tablet type is on the market, the older it gets, and the hardware on mobile devices is still changing pretty quickly. So that's something you kind of need to pay attention to, I think. While on consoles, if the game runs on the basic PS4, then it's also running on the PS4 Pro. But there are kind of rumors that in the future you also have customizable consoles actually. But we'll have to see. That's maybe like 5 to maybe 10 years down the line, I think. So Bilal, let's talk about how hardware actually kind of influences like the scope or actually the development of a game. My opinion on this is that with hardware, it kind of defines the scope that a game can have. For example, if you say, okay, we're going to use like recent components as the minimum requirement to play the game fluidly on a computer, then you would alienate players that don't have the hardware for that. And I think in this case, either you have to sell the game for a high price, or it's not gonna be that successful, I think. I think.
You mean like for a high price, like if it's a higher quality game? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean if you have a small player base, or like if you have the PC game market and only 5% of the players have the hardware required to play the game fluidly, then well, you need to have a pricing that can actually make the game profitable, even if, well, not all of those 5% are gonna buy the game, right?
Yeah.
So it might be a big disadvantage to go for too high spec, like too expensive, too recent computer components
Yeah.
when creating a game.
Yeah, it's hard in general to go over like. I mean, actually, as an indie, it's hard to even reach 60, but it's hard even for like big studios to go over 60. They only go like to 100 for like the digital deluxe versions, or if it's an MMO and you get like multiple years subscription or something like that. Yeah, with
Exactly.
mhm, quality would
I
be.
mean, I mean now you have downloadable content, but
Yeah.
well, I think you want to make the game profitable even with the basic game, except if you say, okay, I'm just gonna um, throw the game at people for cheap price, and then you sell them overpriced DLC pretty much.
Yeah.
So you actually make them pay more than they would pay for a full game
Mhm.
usually. So yeah, I my opinion is that for hardware, I think it would make more sense to like check what are the low budget, what's the low budget components price. For example, I know one game developer from Japan that buys the cheapest laptop he can find when he wants to start developing the game, and so he can make sure that the game runs on low cost,
Mhm.
low spec computers, and that pretty much everyone is actually able to play the game.
Uh-huh.
um, well, of course, if you do it that way, you're kind of limited on
Yep.
what you're gonna do with graphic resolutions and like effects. How well, special effects rendering also takes some processing power. So yeah, maybe your game won't be looking that flashy if you dev it on like the cheapest laptop you can find on the market.
Mhm. Yeah. I think. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the limit, like I think it's a reality that everybody has to accept that a game is not going to run everywhere. Like you're not. I mean, in terms of like quality having an effect or whatever hardware it's going to run on, it's never going to be a literal solution on everything, which is why, like, especially for, I mean, if it's a 2D game, maybe you can almost achieve that, but if it's like something with crazy HD graphics or something 3D with a lot of characters or maybe just like very high detailed characters but a small amount of them, anything that's whenever you make a video game, you need to decide what range of players like you're going to I guess deliver to. And that's, I mean, it's something we talked about before here, where I guess like choosing your audience, but in the terms of performance, you have to know like what kind of people are going to be playing your game, like what kinds of hardware do the people that are going to be playing your game have, like are they young professionals who are going around with MacBooks or MacBook Pros, or are they using a Surface or a Surface Pro, or stuff like that. And Surface, like for example, the Surfaces all have like integrated graphics, which are they don't really run a strong game. So it's like, do you expect young professionals to play this game, or do you expect people who are like hardcore gamers to play it? And I think a lot of games kind of cater to that group, to both of those groups actually. So they'll have like very low detail options and very high detail options, which is I think a common one. So I mean, it's just something like it's a reality that you'd have to accept that you're going to alienate someone. It's just you need to decide who that's going to be. That's going to be alienated. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's
Yeah. Also, I guess hardware. If you decide, okay, that's gonna be the minimum requirement for hardware,
mhm,
then you also have to make. Well, I mean, it also depends on what kind of game or you want to create. I mean, if there is a lot of stuff going on the screen, for example, if you have a lot of enemies on the screen or a lot of units in case of real-time strategy games,
yeah,
then the more stuff that happens on the screen, the less detail you are able to use if
mhm,
you want to make the game playable on lower spec hardware.
yeah,
Um, I mean, um, I guess nobody's gonna enjoy a game that stutters all the time as soon as like two enemies appear on the screen, right?
mhm,
So if you say, okay, uh, well, like quad core processors are the standard today. So we are going to use an old quad core as a minimum spec. Um, then you can just check, okay, what can I do? How far can I go um, to not make the processor be like a bottleneck when it
mhm,
comes to the like running the game? And I think that's like the game design is also really pretty much linked to hardware requirements. Like you said, if you have a 2D game, for example, take a look. Let's just say Undertale or like 1001 Spikes. It's those are 2D RPGs or 2D platformers with pretty basic sprites and pretty well basic graphics overall, right?
yeah,
So in that case, you could kind of say, okay, um, I because the games are kept simple,
mhm,
they run on older computers as well, so it's kind of a style decision,
yeah,
but also it has the advantage of running on old computers. So even if somebody hasn't upgraded his computer for 7 years, then he can still play the game, which is kind of an advantage because let's be honest, casual gamers don't upgrade their system like every few years
yeah.
um, if they don't see a reason to do so.
Mhm. And yeah, I mean, and yeah, like oftentimes, I mean, if you're a casual gamer in the sense that you just play like every now and then, uh, as well, then it's obviously not a main priority to them, so they're not going to worry about upgrading either. So and plus,
Yeah,
yeah, like most
exactly.
casual games don't require any sort of high end gear anyway, so they don't even need to, even if that was something that was on their mind. So.
Hmm.
But something that's interesting is the game that I released for Android and well, PC, Mac, Linux. Obviously on PC, Mac, and Linux, there's no performance issue anywhere. I mean, it'll run on pretty much any system. But the thing you wouldn't expect is this is just a 2D game, right? Where there's stuff that happens in like no event happens at the same time as another one. Like there will be one boss at a time, or there will be one like storm of missiles at a time, right? And but on I think my Google Nexus, I can't remember which version it was, like the tablet, it actually ran I think slower there. Like I think it did run slower, and it might have had some hiccups there in comparison to like my phone, like which was at the time I think it was a Note, yeah, Note 4. I mean now I have a Google Pixel, and there was also a Razer M. It would run fine on all of those, but I think I had some hiccups on the Nexus. And another thing to consider is actually in like programming loops, like a for each. Um, there in Rebound, one of the performance optimizations was the object pooling system, where basically a lot of objects would spawn at once, and then you'd be able to reuse them. And it was kind of, I mean, this was designed like a little bit lazy. So what happened was the objects would pool in like the first time that they were used during the game, but they should have all been pooled before the game started, or maybe in like a coroutine where it happened more slowly. And so that would cause like half a second of freezing every now and then as well. So, stuff like that. Like this is a 2D game, so you wouldn't expect, like any sort of freezing or any sort of performance hindrance because there's not really much going on the screen at once, and it's 2D. But even like but you can mess up. You can really mess up performance even if you're using. You expect, oh, I'm going to use Unity engine or I'm going to use Game Maker engine. And everything's going to turn out okay, and I don't have to worry about anything because I'm not making some high end AAA game where they have like firms dedicated to optimization. It's like, well, no, you can. It's not hard to mess up a game's performance, like no matter what, even if it's 2D. So that's just, I don't know. Something to keep in mind is that limitation is always there. So you have to figure out ways to approach everything, or some like freezing will happen, or maybe the game will run poorly.
Did you get any complaints that the game ran slowly on the Nexus?
No, I mean the game. Well, the reason for that is because the game didn't really get traction on mobile. I mean, it had like a minimum of 5,000 people, like over 5,000 people were playing it or had activated it online, or sorry, on the PC. But mobile didn't have really many downloads at all, so I never really got feedback to that.
Okay.
So I mean, maybe if I had installed analytics, I'd get more info, but I never did that either. So that's a good idea, though, installing analytics.
Yeah, but I think in case of your game, because it's a single player game, people are more willing to accept stuttering or maybe a freeze as long as, let's say, it freezes for half a second. And then just imagine like the game progresses this half second while it's frozen for you, then I guess people would complain.
Yeah.
But if it's completely frozen, then they would say, it's probably loading something.
Yeah.
Like in older games where you knew, okay, the game just froze or stuttered. Okay, so like it loaded a boss or something, so something big.
Yeah.
So you could kind of predict what's coming at you just from the stuttering. But I guess for single player games, they like the player just says, yeah, it's not optimized, or I can still deal with the freeze. But well, just imagine it would be a multiplayer game where you would play, in this case, you would play with your Nexus tablet against your mobile phone at that time, and the mobile phone would still be able to do something for 1 second while the tablet is frozen for that 1 second. Then I guess then people would, like, the player would be pretty pissed.
Yeah, it'd be irritating.
Maybe he lost the match just because the game froze for him and not for the other player.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, if it was multiplayer, it'd be even more annoying. Although it was, the only reason why I had any concern about the hiccups was because it's kind of like a fast game, so you have to tap quickly. And if there's any freeze, then like it's almost a guaranteed, like if the ball is like closer to the edge of a screen, then it's kind of like a guaranteed loss if it ends up freezing and you're headed towards an edge. I mean, that's one of those things that makes me think about it. It's like maybe I should make an asynchronous loading system. Maybe that's like something you should always do, is have like a system where the objects are not all loaded in a single, like they'll load in a loop, but the loop will like have a wait time between each thing that it spawns. So yeah, so that way it's like a kind. not literally asynchronous, but I mean it could be. But basically, it would happen on its own, either in a coroutine or maybe on a different thread where you're spawning stuff in while the game's running, so that it's not freezing the game, so that you can't play it.
Hmm.
Or you could have insane load times and use up a lot of RAM. I don't know. I guess
Okay.
depends on how lazy you are.
Hmm. So, like, just one question: did the stuttering or the freezing influence how much fun the game was for you? I guess did you? I guess you enjoyed playing it more when it was fluent, right?
Yeah, I don't think it was significant because like it would only happen. I mean, when you test the game, it would load. I think the only thing that spawned a lot of units was like I guess the boom bots and the nanobot. Yeah, it didn't really spawn a lot of bosses. It spawned a lot of the. There were three events where there were a lot of things that spawned enemies, and so those like would only happen every now and then. I can't remember how long the stuttering was. It wasn't really crazy significant. It was probably
Okay.
it's probably like a fourth of a second. I think it was obviously something I'd prefer not having in because I mean it's been a while, but like I believe I lost a couple matches to it,
Mm,
um, but yeah, I mean, so that's something to keep in mind, I guess.
yeah. Just from my personal experience, I just always loved when like a first person shooter ran fluently when you started the game, and then you could play the game properly as long as there were like five enemies on the screen.
Yeah.
But then you had like sequences where a lot of weak enemies spawned and the game suddenly started stuttering,
Yeah.
and you were like, oh no. Like it kind of destroys your aiming because like the
Hmm.
units the enemies are still moving, but like the game is just stuttering for you and frame skipping. So yeah. Hmm. I love that,
Yeah.
especially well when you use an right now 6-year-old entry level notebook. Tough luck. Yeah,
Yeah.
like some games I wanted to play, yeah, I was not actually able to play it on that notebook. I would have to switch to my normal computer to play them.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the most actually in especially in like a single player experience where the game is like I guess crafted so that it like so that you play it through and then you experienced it kind of like a movie, but like and then there are parts where they'll have this feature that they included. They're like, oh man, this is gonna be so immersive. It's gonna make the players so like excited and think it's so cool. And it's like this like stupid either the stupid volumetric lighting or volumetric fog feature that's just in this one room that while you're running at 60 FPS everywhere else, you all of a sudden tank down to about 10 FPS. It's the most like irritating thing. It's like, all right, now I have to go onto Google and search how to find some INI or config file where I can disable this fog in this level because the developers apparently tossed it in, didn't think about the fact that even on a system that can run everything else at 60 FPS, it's going to tank the game. And it's like it's one of the most like silly, lazy things ever. What I think actually, yeah, it happened in Fallout 4. I think it actually happened in the new Doom too. There were just these portions of the level where like all of a sudden the tank's down like to 10 FPS, and it's like you like personally me like at that point I just wish like I'd know what the graphics setting is to make everything look bad so that I don't even run into that. Because honestly, like 60 FPS is so much more important in my opinion than graphics because I mean the graphics can look okay and then if the frame rate is inconsistent it just like makes it's one of those things that we talked about like last time where if it just adds this irritation into the player where it's like all right well this game is pissing me off like why would I keep playing it if I could just stop playing it and all of a sudden my life would be more fun. So I mean when they have that inconsistency, it's like really I don't know. It just seems lazy. Like they could have pulled it out, and the game would have been better, basically. So that's like some
Hmm.
stuff like fog or excessive props, that kind of thing, where they don't optimize it.
Yeah, I agree. Like 60 FPS is pretty much the standard today.
Mhm.
Uh, well, some console games actually stutter at certain points in the game, or at
Mhm.
least that's what I read. I'm
Actually, I
not
think
like the
consoles.
biggest.
I think consoles are still running at 30. I know that there was
No, 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 no.
really.
It depends on, maybe it depends on the game,
I think the
but
biggest like
for
AAA ones like Call of Duty and like what else? Doesn't Destiny? I don't know about Destiny. I think a lot of the like new ones are still at 30, at least on Xbox. I don't know about PlayStation.
I think I think there was a difference. Like at least when PlayStation 4 was released, or both consoles were released, where PlayStation 4 ran at 60 FPS and Xbox One had lower FPS
Oh,
on
okay.
in the same game.
Actually, now that I think about it, I remember that one. Oh, Destiny 2 will run at 30 FPS on Xbox One X. Yeah, I don't know. I remember there was one game that yeah, what was it? Assassin's Creed Unity, some Assassin's Creed game where Ubisoft said like 30 FPS was more cinematic, and everybody got outraged at that. So maybe that was like maybe they were running at 6. I don't know. I feel like I should know this, but okay. I don't know. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's well, for example, fighting games always run at 60 FPS because as people will complain that yeah, the game is like stuttering
Oh,
or
yeah.
not fast enough, like the animations are not fluid enough and so on. So
Gotcha.
like if you have a high FPS, then you also have the advantage of animations actually looking fluid. If you if you say okay, let's have really fancy graphics, but we're gonna cap the game at 30 FPS, then people will complain, oh, it's not fluid. It looks good, but yeah, it's not fluid.
Hmm.
Um, I think there were several games actually where they kept the frame rate at 30 FPS, even on computer, where
Hmm.
people went into like the game files and modified it to unlock the FPS limit
Yeah.
because they didn't like this slow frame rate at all. I guess if right now if you buy a gaming monitor, then well 60 FPS monitors, like 60 hertz monitors are the standard.
Hmm.
But then you have gaming monitors that have 144 hertz.
Yeah.
So imagine you have a monitor that can display 144 frames per second, but the game and you have the rig. You have the computer then that can actually play games at that speed or maybe at 100 FPS.
Hmm.
And then you have a game that you could run at 100 FPS or really fluent, like really fluid gameplay, and then you're getting capped at 30 because the devs thought like, okay, we have to cap it at 30 because uh, so so everyone has the same experience, kind of.
Yeah.
Um, then yeah, people will complain that well, all I guess people or players that have a computer that can actually render more than this cap will complain like, yeah, I could have a better experience, but you're not letting me.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
so yeah, I think frame rate is a pretty big topic today. Like in the past, you had this which graphics look better, like on console, but
Hmm.
now it's all about who can um like present that graph like the beautiful graphics but with 60 fps or higher.
Yeah. Actually think
Yeah.
about it in if you think about the example of like an RTS, like the fact that players can run at a different frame rate means that you need to have like a sort of batching system to make sure that the game doesn't desynchronize. Like as in, when I say batching, I mean like a batching functionality basically for sending commands to the server and players. So like when a player sends a command, then it has to be in the right order and then sent like at the right times, like between players, and because just yeah because of that differentiation. So it like yeah something you don't really think about is that FPS does actually affect like how fast the game runs and that kind of thing. So it needs to be like
Yeah.
locked, and it can't run faster than somebody else's game and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. A funny example is actually Quake 3,
mhm.
where I think you capped the game via your settings to, I think it was something like 123 FPS. Because at that FPS, like the speed of the game influenced the physics of the game. So you could, I think, jump higher and further. So
Yeah.
some jumps, like some trick jumps, were only possible if you ran the game at that specific frame rate.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Because it affects the
so
physics tick.
yeah, yeah. So maybe you also have to watch out. Like, just imagine you test the game at, let's say, 100 FPS.
Mm-hmm.
Because you say, okay, graphics are not that important. Yeah, 100 FPS. It runs on my computer as the dev. But then some other computer might only run it at 50. So maybe it actually influences the physics or like the behavior of units in RTS. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
just imagine you have a jump that's nearly impossible to do because on 100 FPS, it's difficult but doable. But on 50 FPS, maybe the guy just cannot jump as far uh, as
Yeah.
if the frame rate is higher.
And so the VSync settings there, you hit it on to
Ugh.
hit it onto
Ugh,
60.
yuck. Yeah, so I guess something that might be handy if you want to check what people are actually using as hardware on a computer is Steam has hardware statistics available on what, for example, graphic cards people are using that are sharing the information with Steam. So,
Mhm.
okay, of course, you need to take the statistics with a grain of salt because not everyone is sharing the hardware specs with Steam, but you could see, okay, all right, like 20% to 30% are still using pretty old graphic cards.
Yeah.
And yeah, only like 10% are using current gen or last gen graphic cards. So then you can also just check what hardware are people using, and then decide from there. Maybe if you want to have a test rig actually for testing purposes, then you could just say, okay, I'm just gonna grab the most standard stuff that people are using, and then I'm gonna test it on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's most optimal is like starting off with like let's say you have a level of detail because like if the game is 3D and has art that's not just low poly, like if you have serious art like I mean like an FPS or StarCraft or something like that, then you want to I think it's good to start with like the low level of detail options and see if you can get those running like on the minimum hardware that you want it to at I guess the minimum frame rate that you want it to, because I don't know, maybe you want it to run on 30 FPS on like an old notebook. So yeah, I mean if you were to look at those stats and then like see what old notebooks are running, I mean, it's a good starting point to figuring out what hardware you want it to be a minimum requirement for. And then
Hmm.
on that one, you get it to run on 30 FPS. And then, like, I mean, if people are lower than that notebook, then maybe they'll hit 25 or 20 FPS. And I mean, those are like difficult to play on, but yeah, I mean, the minimum requirement is there for a reason. And so people in that kind of boat where they don't upgrade their hardware, they'd have to, find other means. Like maybe you have config files where you can turn certain things off and that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I think it's definitely a good starting point to look at the analytics out there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Also, something um, I want to mention is that recently people are not upgrading computers that much as in the past because the hardware processing power increase has kind of slowed down recently in recent years.
Yeah.
For example, when I am playing games, I use my uh, how old is it actually? It should be at least 8 or 9 years old
Uh-huh.
computer. Um, or well, I also built a gaming rig now for traveling purposes to tournaments, but else I pretty much just use my really really old computer or a notebook or notebook or laptop, whatever you want to call it.
Uh-huh.
And I've also read that a current trend is that um, because even an entry level notebook can be used for daily purposes, for example, writing emails, doing office, um, or using office programs, um, maybe just watching HD videos, um, HD or full HD. That notebooks have actually replaced computers for um, more and more people. I mean, for example, if you live in a student dormitory, then maybe, well, because space is limited, you don't want to take up that much space with a huge PC rig, um,
Yeah.
and you just use a notebook. So I think you, as a developer, you also need to just keep an eye on the trends. For example, this would be an important trend, I think, especially because notebooks don't always have a dedicated graphics cards. Some use a GPU, so it's a processor with a graphic unit.
Oh, you mean
Um,
an APU? Actually, I think, yeah, they'll use like,
yeah, oh yeah,
yeah,
APU.
yeah.
GPU is a graphics card. Yeah, sorry,
Uh-huh.
I mixed it up actually. Yeah, an APU. Sorry. So an APU is a CPU and kind of a GPU together combined, and well, there are also differences. Like AMD has uh, better better APUs because they have stronger graphic units installed um, in the APU. So,
Yeah.
but AMD is sadly not that popular. Most sold notebooks use Intel.
Yeah, they'll use
So yeah.
integrated graphics because the APU is only that one series of AMD ones where they had that, and it was actually a really good deal at the time. You could buy an APU and play like a lot of the games out there. But obviously, it wasn't the high end thing. It was a good deal though. Like you'd usually be annoyed at integrated graphics, but AMD did a good job here, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
they are still really, really good. I mean, they are an APU is weaker than a processor and a pretty entry level graphics card.
yeah,
But well, if you don't have the possibility to upgrade to a graphics card, for example, with a notebook, or there are also, well, if you buy a cheap computer like a pre-built computer, some actually have like soldered on processors, or maybe they don't have a PCIe lane uh, to use. for a graphics card. So, well, I guess also keeping an APU or integrated graphics in mind will also be, enable, um, let's say, hardware newbies or people that don't buy um, gaming computers to play the game actually.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's. I guess you have to worry about, like I said earlier, if people, what kind of stuff your audience is running on. I mean, you could always look at it as like a bad thing, like, oh no, my game is limited by hardware. I don't, and my creativity is destroyed. But I mean, if you think about it, like all creativity is within the bounds of something, which isn't a bad thing. It's like it just kind of, I mean, you make what you can inside of a limit, and it always has like effects on everything. And so I mean, in this case of like hardware, it's like, well, if you're it actually can help drive your marketing for something. So like, if you're going to be making games for um, casual players, then you can kind of target those devices, which are most likely tablets and notebooks if they're um, casual players, because casual players oftentimes they don't focus on gaming as much as somebody else, and so they'll have systems that don't have crazy strong hardware. So you can kind of connect the dots in that regard.
Yeah, I guess in that case you kind of keep the game the game art. Let's say, like, if you take a look at Super Meat Boy, for example, it's pretty basic art, right? It's
Yeah.
just really stylized, cartoonish graphics, and well, it runs really well on older hardware as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you target uh, like tablets as well, or like the really really cheap PCs, then maybe you just say, okay, instead of using high poly 3D models, I'm just going to use 2D sprites or 2D animations
Yeah.
that are better for, well, the hardware, or don't require that um, high spec hardware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Else, something I want to mention is that actually also keep file size in check, because even, for example, in Germany, we have rural areas with spotty internet. So, well, spotty and or very slow internet.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you know ISDN?
No, not sure.
I think the speed is something like 700 kilobits per second.
Okay.
So yeah, not even like 1K down,
Mm-hmm.
not even 1 Mbit down, and that's today. Some people are still stuck with that, or maybe they have like 1 Mbit down. Yeah, or maybe just even like LTE,
Yeah.
with a file with a data limit.
Yeah.
So yeah, uh, sometimes I read comments on like computer forums, German computer forums, where they say, okay, I bought the game, but like the physical copy, but then there's just a Steam installer on the DVD
Yeah.
with a key code,
Oh, no.
and so now I have to download 50 gigabytes, which would, even if I let my computer run all day, it will take 1 month to download.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
So
it's the most irritating thing. Even if it's not going to take a month, like I remember that happened with Skyrim, and it's like, why am I downloading things if they gave me a CD?
yeah, I think it was the same with was it Metal Gear Solid 5? I think there they just like they created a DVD, but on the DVD was just like 200 kilobyte Steam installer, and that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I th- like I guess independent games are not that huge in file size generally, but for example, if you have music and you don't compress it, then well, if you, for example, use FLAC, the FLAC,
Audio format.
what is it? Yeah, the encoding format.
Yeah.
Then instead of like an MP3, 3 minutes would be, let's say, 3 megabytes, and there it would be like 20 megabytes or something.
Yeah.
Because it's lossless encoding, and it's just not many people will probably hear the difference. So yeah, just use, for example, in this case, an MP3 and save people 17 megabytes to download. If you use like 10, if you have 10 tracks, then it would be like 170 megabyte of extra traffic as well.
Yeah, you know what I think a lot of people would do like you could get the same quality as like a wavefront, like a .wav, as you could with an
Yeah.
OGG. I think like you could pretty much get the same quality I think out of an OGG. I don't know, maybe I'm making this up, but like but the OGG would be like a lot smaller in size. And so I think at one point very long time ago we were gonna use that I think for some video game. I think now I've been using. Actually, I'm not even sure which ones I'm using right now because I'm typically like outsourcing the audio from somewhere, and I don't really worry about like what the format is. It's probably a Wavefront or an MP3. I'm not sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I saw some, well, games that just come with MP3 files that the game cycles through or loads.
Uh huh.
So yeah, I guess
Yeah, it
that's
looks
one
like
option.
actually I'm using Waves. I have it in front of me, and I'm using Wavefronts. But yeah,
Okay.
it's supposed to be high quality.
Um, and also, if you keep the file size is low, then the game will load faster, especially on HDDs, because well, solid state disks are becoming more popular today, but not everyone is using an HDD, especially on notebooks. Notebooks still often come with like 1 terabyte HDDs instead of solid state disks. Um, so yeah, I think it's unnecessary to make the game as big as possible file size wise
Yeah.
if it doesn't bring any extra like quality. I mean, rather put in more content than let's say have a background image be like 50 megabyte in size instead of like 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you have uh, any further comments on hardware?
Actually, I think I did want to mention. What did I want to mention? Oh yeah, it was about I think about test systems. And like if you're on a $0 budget, like making some sort of game, and like let's say like you and one guy or just you are doing everything, and then like you're like, oh no, I need to see if the game actually runs properly because you might have a high end system. Like with me, I had a high end system, so I couldn't notice anything wrong when making the game because like the Unity editor, for example, um, it will have much worse performance than the actual built game. So that's why you typically want a strong system when you're making a video game, as your main development system, just because you don't want to have to be stuck with bad efficiency because the editor would be lagging while running your game because of, one, because the editor takes more performance, and two, because when you're debugging or writing new code, you might add in performance problems, which then would cause, like, on a bad computer, very slow development. So if you only have a high-end computer, like, then what you do is just, if you want $0 testing, go and either send your game to people who have different variations of computers, or like ask them if you can use their computer to test your game. And if you need to collect the data, you can either have analytics plugged into it. Like Unity has like a one button click analytics activation now. So I mean, if you build a game on Unity, then all of a sudden you have analytics, and you can figure out how well a game is running on any computer that you send it to. So so you can either use analytics, or you can ask them, was my game jittering at all? Did you have a good experience? What was the frame rate? I mean, so like, I mean, data collection, like, very easy nowadays. And I mean, if you want to test on a $0 budget, like I said, you just go around and find computers from friends, family. I don't know, maybe even like a public library if they let you install your game. So I mean,
I guess you would probably also have old hardware just lying around, or maybe somebody else
yeah,
has
exactly.
an old computer lying around. Or you could also do something like undervolting, or I'm not sure how much you can do in the BIOS.
Mhm.
Uh, Maybe you can disable some cores of your processor, or
Yeah, you could change.
like
I think you can
undervolt the
change.
graphics cards and stuff like that.
I guess you could underclock or overclock your processor too. I never actually needed to do that. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, at least from what I read, like the difference is not that super high, but well, if you just at least want to limit your like the power of your computer a bit, then it's an option to just see, okay, um, like how much of a difference does it make um, if I underclock or if I overclock?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like my is it my normal computer configuration that runs the game well, and if I underclock, maybe it starts stuttering or something.
Uh huh.
Or maybe when you overclock, then maybe the game just starts to run too fast, maybe something like that. If you
Mm-hmm.
like, I remember games that linked the game speed to the FPS. So the higher the FPS, the faster the game actually ran.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and
but
I think that should happen in any game. That's why like Unity will just have a setting for like what you want to limit the frame rate to, which is typically 60. So
mm, yeah. So what let mm, let's quickly talk about what do you think is actually a good test system right now. So just if you would want to build the test system, what would you use?
build one. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think I would just buy. If I was willing to spend money on a new test system, then I think I would just buy like a low end laptop off of like online, actually, because in stores they're typically selling higher end ones. So I think like, yeah, go onto like Newegg or like Amazon and just find like some laptop that runs with integrated graphics. I mean, like, and like go through the different kinds of like laptops you want to run it on. So maybe you want to go like low end laptop to middle end laptop to high end laptop. So maybe your low end one has an integrated chipset for graphics, or has and then your medium one would have an i3, and maybe also like higher quality Intel like integrated graphics, and then maybe your higher end one. I don't know, like maybe it's not like crazy high end, but maybe it's like higher end, so you have an APU or something in it.
No,
Or like
high-end laptop is not
no, not high
APU.
end. No, I'm not saying high end because you could also build it like a desktop later on. Like if you, I'm saying not high end, but I'm saying like more the higher lower end, like medium section, but like more high end
Hmm.
than. Because obviously, yeah, an APU is not high end. I mean, a high end laptop is the same as a high end desktop, right? So I mean, like you just have like a Titan Mini or
More
something, or
like a
like a Ryzen.
medium.
Well,
Okay.
they both have the capability, but typically laptops are lower. Yeah, they but I mean like hardware is hardware. So just like if
Hmm.
you're willing to have a giant box laptop, then you can get a giant box laptop. So, I mean, but yeah, typically I mean a high end laptop would be. I mean you probably can. I mean I don't even know, but it would be like almost the highest end like Nvidia cards or AMD cards. Are they actually making
Hmm.
Ryzen notebooks right now?
I think some are announced, I think,
Uh-huh. But yeah, I
but
mean,
not on the market yet.
gotcha.
Well, no, I think the most recent APUs are not Ryzen yet, but I'm not 100% sure.
Hmm. But yeah, I mean, regardless, obviously an APU is not a high end laptop. I mean, a high end laptop is like up there, like,
De-
but
Dedicated GPU.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, but I mean, if you're like in terms of like, say you have professionals like between casual and like more often players, you'll probably have something between um, like uh, integrated graphics with very like cheap processor, and
Hmm.
then like you'll have, and that will like range like the next one up would probably be something between an i3, and then like after that you'd have an i7 with some like video card, and so on. So I mean, I think that I would
Hmm.
start off with buying a laptop, and then once I got into like the more higher end, like if I were to get an i7, if I was literally going to buy a test system that was an i7, which I mean I wouldn't, I mean I think I have an i7 in my computer, so, but if I was trying to buy like the highest end laptop, then I think that I would actually just end up trying to build a PC instead, because those I think I mean it'll end up cheaper,
Yeah,
of
just
course,
a
than
cheap
a,
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
than it would be a laptop that's high end. But I mean, if you did want to
Hmm.
test for a more like gamer oriented laptop, you could probably get a Razer of sorts. Like I know the Razer, they're expensive as hell, but they they're certainly considered the high end. Like the Razer Blade is certainly the high end laptop for Windows gaming, I think. Um,
Hmm.
and I mean, with Mac, it's not really that difficult. You kind of have two computers to test, like one of the MacBooks and one of the MacBook Pros would
Yeah.
suffice. Yeah. So I mean,
Just that they are, well, they are more expensive than buying a high high spec laptop from
yeah,
Razer or something.
I think Razer
You're
actually.
paying for the brand as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they do a good job. I think the hardware actually, it's not in terms of pure strength, but they are. It is like very well done hardware. I think.
Yeah.
The Razer Blade is like, obviously, like, yeah, there are MacBook Pros cheaper than a Razer Blade, so um, that exists. That's a thing. But yeah, the Razer Blade is like a lot better specs for the value, I think,
Hmm.
in terms of performance. Yeah.
Yeah. Just something I want to mention real quick. If you want to buy a test system, then also check the CPU. For example, you said you would buy like an i7 processor, but then you have different endings. Like maybe you have a U at the end or HQ, and like U is an ultrabook processor, so it's
Mm.
um, and HQ is actually I think like a desktop i7,
Hmm.
or at least it's a more powerful i7. So you can both are i7, but the processor power can be very different
Hmm.
depending on the ending letter.
Yeah, there's also the gigahertz to take into account. Like some will be like 4 point something and 3 point something. There's also and like you have the option of overclocking as well, so they'll list them as like
Hmm.
Intel Turbo or something like that. Um, I
But that disables some cores, I think.
hmm, I don't know much about it. There's also what was it? Yeah, when I can remember, it was something else about I think laptop processors that I wanted to mention. Hmm. I can't quite remember. Anyway, but yeah, I think
Okay. Do you want to hear my test system or
yeah.
what?
Oh
Or
yeah, I was gonna mention. Sorry, was actually at like medium. If we want to like say specific processors, there was I used to have this AMD. It was like called, I think it was the 8350. It was like Vishera Core 8 core Black Edition.
yeah.
And so that one's a really good. I mean, if you look like at a benchmark kind of thing now between like Intel's like new generation and like a few years back, you'll see like in between the middle there is kind of the Vishera 8 core. So I mean, like
Hmm.
for like a medium kind of system, that's not a bad processor to look at. And I mean, like with the video card, yeah, you could probably get. I mean, something like even like what is there? I don't know about. It's been a while, but like there's like what between like 460 and 950 or 960 now actually is like what's kind of I think viable to use. So I mean, you could probably
Hmm.
get like a GTX 550 or like a Radeon like what? I don't even not quite sure about the Radeon. Probably something in the 6000 series. I think would be a medium sort of laptop. I'd say, yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like, what do you think?
For me, yeah, I pretty much agree with your suggestions.
Uh-huh.
I would use well, maybe dual core is a bit old already.
Yeah.
So I guess the standard quad core CPUs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would use 4 gigabytes of RAM to test because
Yeah.
well, if you have a quad core, an older quad core, then people probably tend to have 4 gigabytes
Yeah.
of
For sure.
RAM only available. Then an HDD doesn't cost much anymore. And if you just want to test stuff, then I guess you can just grab a used one for like $10 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And else, like you recommended as well, I would go for an old graphics card. I wouldn't even have to look far because I'm still using a Radeon 5830, I think.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, that thing is ancient. Um, so I guess if I would buy um, a graphics card for a test rig, I would probably buy a Radeon 290.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think it's just a rebranded 7000 something. I think they just reused it or no,
Uh-huh.
they just changed their name. So yeah, I would use that for the graphics card. Well, to at least check for minimum specs
Uh-huh.
if it runs on old hardware, and if well, if you don't want to use a computer to test, then I would use a new like $400 laptop
Mm-hmm.
at least. Recently, I bought a new laptop with an AMD. What is it? Is it an A10 or an A12? I think it was an A12 APU.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I only paid, I think, $300 or $350 for it.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, even a $400 laptop can have an all right processor and maybe even have a dedicated graphics card. Maybe, well, it's probably not the high end uh, dedicated graphic cards for mobile devices, but yeah, uh, I guess if if you're aiming for example younger people, so like students, university students, uh, of course you have people that that actually buy an Apple MacBook like for $1,000,
Yeah.
but people that don't want to pay for the brand, or that say just want to uh, use it mainly for university or school, then they probably won't uh, buy a notebook for $1,000,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
also a mouse with 3 buttons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah.
Um,
Actually, I was gonna mention. Yeah, I wonder if a Core 2 Duo. I wonder if like the lowest end laptop you could get right now would be like a Core 2 Duo, and well, not literally lowest end, but like the lowest end to consider even, because I mean, obviously you can get a Celeron, which is horrible,
hmm,
but I mean, I wonder if a
yeah.
Core 2 Duo with like I don't know what I don't even know the range on the Intel HD graphics, but like something with
Hmm,
like a lower end Intel HD graphics plus Core 2 Duo, like that's your if you're making like a 2D game that's not very character intensive and you want to test if your
hmm,
code is just like really bad and not optimized, then like Core 2 a Duo with Intel HD graphics is the way to go, I think. Like and how I mean like what you'd probably pay 300 or less for that. Probably less considering I mean you
hmm.
said that you paid 300 for or
I,
like 400 for that APU laptop, so
hmm. I think right now, um, I'm not even sure if Intel has 4 core notebook CPUs.
uh-huh.
So I think even if you buy a more expensive notebook that uses a mobile Intel CPU, like an ultrabook CPU, I think they all have only 2 cores.
Uh-huh.
2 cores with 4 threads.
Okay.
So yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I'm not 100% sure. So if somebody knows better, then feel free to correct me in the comments, or share your knowledge with us.
Yeah, me as well. I'm not so well versed
Hmm.
in hardware. I kind of just look at the higher end stuff and get something in between there.
Hmm. Because when new hardware is getting released, the other stuff becomes cheaper.
Yeah.
Except if it's good for mining cryptocurrency, then yeah, tough
Exactly.
luck.
Yep.
Like I guess the Radeon 290 is actually a bad recommendation, because I read it's good for mining cryptocurrencies.
Hmm.
So yeah, people that want to mine that are buying the Radeon 290 and so on.
Yeah.
And so the prices have shot up quite a lot, at least from what I read.
Yeah, I heard people were buying pre-mades because they were cheaper than the actual video cards, which is interesting.
Mm. All right. So last comment for me. Test on the test your game on the platform you're developing it for. So especially if you want to release the game for Windows and Linux, for example,
Hmm.
the performance can be different between Windows and Linux. So um, yeah,
Yeah.
actually have this like Linux and Windows installed on the same machine,
Hmm.
so you can test how much of a difference there is.
Yeah.
Um,
And I would recommend like making sure that your Linux systems can actually run OpenGL or can run it on your game properly because you need to keep in mind the versions of OpenGL if you're going to be building for Linux too. So,
hmm.
yep.
All right, then I guess you don't have any comments
Well,
anymore.
final statement is that performance is a design decision partially, and also I'd say like 50% maybe on both sides. Both like as you're developing the game, you need to decide what you're doing in terms of performance, and you also at the end need to decide what you can do to really squeeze performance. Oh yeah, actually, and I wanted to mention there's a guy who does. I mean, he works for Unity, so he does a lot of talks at the Unite conferences about performance. He has a lot of good information about like specifics. His name is Ian Dundor, I think, and so like he did a there's also a Unity 2017 talk called like squeezing Unity for performance or optimization or something like that. So I'd recommend like the things that he talks about because he works for Unity's like biggest clients to go and figure out what the problems with performance are there. So it's a good resource to look at the Unite talks that he's in, where he's telling what you can do and what hidden performance faults there are in Unity.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess performance is king.
Yeah.
Keep the game running at 60 FPS. Check what hardware is popular right now. As a short summary of what we talked about, and yeah, so
Yeah.
that's it for today. If you have any comments concerning hardware, maybe you think testing on laptops is bullshit. I'm a real gamer. I got my Ryzen Threadripper installed already. And so feel free to comment, let us know maybe what hardware you're using. And if you had any problems with recent games that you really wanted to play but were not able to play because of hardware limitations, that would be, at least for me, it would be interesting if our listeners have had problems with hardware requirements in the, well, let's say this year or last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so that's episode 7 of the D League. Stay tuned and see you next episode.
Goodbye.
Bye.